My sister looked directly at my 8-year-old daughter and said her child had no place at the beach house. Then she actually giggled. My daughter went completely silent, her small hands trembling in her lap. I did not scream or cry. I simply looked at my sister and said there would be no beach house because I was canceling everything. She froze mid-laugh. My mother leaned across the pristine dining table and whispered, asking if I was serious. I just smiled and did not say a single word. It was only the beginning of a reckoning they never saw coming. My name is Tara, and at 32 years old, I have spent my entire life as the designated failure of my affluent family. Despite being the founder and chief executive officer of a luxury hospitality group, I keep my wealth completely hidden. I dress simply, drive a modest car, and let my family believe I am still struggling to find my way. Before I continue this story of how a single dinner changed our family dynamic forever, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth and treated your child poorly. You will definitely want to stick around to hear exactly how I dismantled my sister's perfect facade using nothing but my cell phone and the absolute truth. Growing up in an elite African American community in Boston meant adhering to strict rules of respectability and appearances. My parents, Desmond and Shirley, measured success entirely by social standing country club memberships and whom you invited to your summer charity events. My older sister Vanessa was their undisputed golden child. She was obsessed with high society and married Preston, a wealthy white finance executive who constantly leveraged our family reputation to secure his prestigious investments. I was the exact opposite of everything they valued. After a difficult divorce in my 20s, I decided to forge my own independent path. I dropped out of law school, much to my parents' absolute horror, and started a small real estate management company that eventually grew into an international empire. But to Desmond and Shirley, I was just a stubborn, massive disappointment who threw away a highly respected legal career to work in basic customer service. They thought I was poor, struggling, and desperately in need of their constant, unsolicited advice. The Sunday dinner at my parents' sprawling estate was a mandatory monthly ritual that I usually endured just to keep the peace. The dining room was suffocatingly formal tonight. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, glowing light over the long mahogany table, which was set with fine china and polished silver cutlery. The rich scent of roasted lamb, garlic, and rosemary filled the air, but the emotional atmosphere was as cold and rigid as ever. I sat quietly near the end of the table, carefully cutting Brielle meat into small pieces while listening to Vanessa hold court. My sweet daughter Brielle wears a small hearing aid and is the most observant, brilliant girl in the world, but my family treated her like an inconvenience. Vanessa was wearing a designer silk dress, her wrists glittering with heavy diamond tennis bracelets. She spoke loudly, ensuring everyone at the table hung on her every single word. Preston sat right beside her, swirling a glass of expensive red wine, looking smug and incredibly self-satisfied. "I am telling you, Mom, the summer is going to be absolutely legendary," Vanessa announced, projecting her voice across the large room. "Preston and I just secured a rental for an ultra-exclusive mansion in Oak Bluffs down in Martha Vineyard. We are hosting the entire family for a week in July. It is a stunning property with an infinity pool, private beach access, and a full dedicated staff." My mother Shirley clasped her perfectly manicured hands together, her eyes shining with pure, unadulterated pride. "Oh, Vanessa, that sounds magnificent. Oak Bluffs is the only place to be seen during the summer season. Who else is staying at this incredible property?" Preston jumped into the conversation, leaning forward with that arrogant, entitled posture he always adopted when discussing business matters. "It is not just a family vacation, Shirley. I am flying in a group of high-net-worth investors from New York. We are hosting a massive VIP networking weekend at the estate. These guys control billions in corporate assets, and bringing them to a culturally significant elite property in Martha Vineyard is going to seal a massive investment fund for my firm." My father Desmond nodded approvingly, slicing his lamb with precise, deliberate movements. "Excellent strategic move, Preston. Combining elite social settings with high-level business networking is exactly how true generational wealth is built and maintained. That is the kind of forward thinking this family highly values. I kept my eyes focused on my plate, carefully chewing my food. I knew exactly which property they were talking about. There was only one ultra-exclusive mansion in that specific highly sought-after enclave of Oak Bluffs that matched Vanessa's boastful description perfectly. It was the absolute crown jewel of my luxury hospitality group portfolio. I had purchased it under a blind corporate trust 2 years ago and spent millions renovating it to architectural perfection. Hearing my sister and brother-in-law brag about renting my own house was a surreal experience, but I maintained my neutral, carefully blank expression. Brielle tugged gently on my sleeve. She was trying her best to follow the fast-paced conversation, but the acoustics in the large dining room made it difficult for her hearing aid to filter the overlapping loud voices. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with slight confusion, and asked me quietly to pass the butter dish. I smiled warmly at her, reaching across the table for the small crystal container. My mother immediately frowned at the minor interruption. "Tara, you really need to teach her how to properly enunciate at a formal dinner table," Shirley scolded, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive condescension. "We are having an extremely important discussion about Preston business ventures, and her constant fidgeting and mumbling is highly distracting." I took a deep, slow breath, forcing myself to remain calm for Brielle's sake. "She is simply asking for the butter, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice steady and measured. "There is absolutely no need to make her feel bad about it." Desmond sighed loudly, shaking his head, as if my response was a profound personal insult to his authority. "You always coddle her, Tara. That is why she continually struggles to fit into these refined environments. In the real corporate world, people do not make special accommodations just because you ask nicely. You need to be highly realistic about how society views children like her. You should be using these dinners to teach her proper decorum instead of encouraging her disruptive behavior." The tension at the table thickened rapidly, filling the space like a heavy fog. Brielle, sensing the immediate shift in the adults' moods, shrank back into her large wooden chair. Her small hands were visibly shaking as she picked up her silver fork to continue eating her dinner. She was so incredibly nervous that her fingers slipped against the smooth metal. The heavy silver fork clattered loudly against the fine china plate before tumbling off the edge and hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp, ringing sound that echoed through the entire dining room. The conversation stopped dead. Every single eye at the table turned to stare harshly at my 8-year-old daughter. Vanessa let out a dramatic, exasperated groan and slammed her wine glass down onto the table, spilling a few drops of red liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Disabled kids should just stay home," Vanessa snapped, her voice dripping with absolute unrestrained disgust. I felt a cold, dangerous stillness settle over my entire body. I looked directly at my older sister, fully waiting for her to realize what she had said and apologize for the horrific comment, but she did not even blink. She just glared at my child. "Preston is having highly important VIP investors over at the estate next month," Vanessa continued, gesturing wildly with her hands to emphasize her point. "These are influential billionaires, Tara. They expect flawless execution and high society elegance at all times. If Brielle cannot even hold a fork properly at a simple family dinner without causing a massive embarrassing scene, she is going to be a complete total liability around our important guests. Your child has no place at the beach house." Then, as if she had just delivered an incredibly witty punchline, Vanessa actually giggled, a high-pitched, cruel sound that cut straight through my heart. Brielle went completely silent. She reached up and touched her hearing aid, her lower lip trembling as she tried desperately to hold back her tears. She looked down at her lap, entirely ashamed of simply existing in their presence. I turned my gaze to my parents, fully expecting them to immediately reprimand Vanessa for speaking to a vulnerable child that way. I expected them to demand basic respect for their own granddaughter. Instead, my mother Shirley slowly wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and nodded in firm agreement with Vanessa. "Vanessa has a very valid point," Tara Shirley said, her tone completely devoid of any maternal warmth or basic human empathy. You cannot reasonably expect your sister to jeopardize a multi-million-dollar business deal just to accommodate your daughter's physical limitations. It is incredibly selfish of you to even consider bringing Brielle to an environment where she clearly does not belong and cannot behave properly. You need to be realistic about this situation. You and Brielle can simply stay here in the city while the rest of us go to Oak Bluffs and handle business. It is honestly for the best. My father Desmond chimed in, picking up his wineglass and taking a slow, deliberate sip. Exactly. This is a critical, vital networking opportunity for Preston and our entire family brand. The family absolutely needs to present a unified, flawless, sophisticated front to these investors. We cannot have any embarrassing, awkward distractions running around the property, ruining the carefully curated atmosphere. You understand, Tara. You always were the practical one when you were not making terrible, life-ruining career choices. I sat there looking at the four of them. They were so utterly convinced of their own superiority. They were so wrapped up in their desperate, pathetic need to impress wealthy white investors that they were perfectly willing to emotionally crush a sweet 8-year-old girl just to maintain an illusion of perfection and status. They truly, deeply believed I was completely powerless, a poor divorced dropout who had to gratefully accept whatever meager scraps of inclusion they threw my way. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw my drink across the table or launch into a defensive, highly emotional argument about my daughter's incredible worth and intelligence. Anger is a hot, fleeting emotion, but what I felt in that precise moment was pure, glacial, absolute clarity. The kind of clarity that fundamentally changes the trajectory of a lifetime. I reached into my simple, unbranded leather handbag and pulled out my cell phone. "What are you doing?" Vanessa asked, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Are you going to text your little customer service friends to complain about how mean your successful family is being to you?" I completely ignored her and dialed a private number I knew by heart. I put the phone on speaker mode, turned the volume all the way up, and set it gently on the table right next to my dinner plate. The line rang exactly twice before a crisp, highly professional voice answered. "Platinum Luxury Estates Concierge Desk. This is David speaking. How may I provide you with exceptional service this evening?" "David, it is Tara." I said, my voice perfectly calm, level, and ringing with absolute, unquestionable authority. "Ms. Tara," the concierge said, his tone instantly shifting from polite customer service to deep, unmistakable reverence and respect. "Good evening. It is an absolute honor to hear from you. What can I do for you tonight?" "Cancel the upcoming reservation for the Oak Bluffs property for the second week of July." I instructed, clearly enunciating every single word so there could be no misunderstanding. "The booking is currently under the name Preston and Vanessa. Revoke all of their property access codes immediately and flag their profile in our internal security system. They are no longer welcome at any of our properties worldwide." There was a sharp, audible intake of breath from Preston. Vanessa's smug, arrogant smile vanished completely instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion and growing panic. "Of course, Ms. Tara," the concierge replied without a single second of hesitation or questioning. "I am locating their file right now. Consider the reservation permanently canceled and their access completely revoked across our entire global hospitality network. Would you like me to process a full refund for their initial deposit, or hold the funds pending a detailed review of their account status?" "Hold the deposit for now," I said, maintaining my icy composure. "I will review their financial standing personally tomorrow morning. Have a good evening, David." "Thank you, Ms. Tara. Good evening to you as well." I ended the call and slipped the phone smoothly back into my handbag. The silence in the formal dining room was absolute and incredibly heavy. It was so quiet you could hear the large grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway outside. "What was that?" Vanessa demanded, her voice suddenly high-pitched and panicky, entirely stripped of its previous haughty confidence. "What did you just do? Who was that on the phone?" I stood up smoothly and gently pulled Brielle's heavy wooden chair back, helping her to her feet with careful, tender movements. I knelt down to her eye level and smiled warmly at my beautiful, perfect, brilliant daughter. "You are going to go to a much better beach house, sweetie. I promised her, completely ignoring the four gaping, flabbergasted adults sitting frozen at the table behind me. I stood back up to my full height and looked directly into Vanessa's wide, terrified eyes. "There is no beach house," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet, stunned room. "I am canceling everything." Vanessa froze, completely paralyzed by a reality she could not even begin to comprehend or accept. Her mind was clearly short-circuiting, trying to process how her designated failure of a sister had just commanded a luxury concierge with the snap of her fingers. For years, she had built her entire identity around being better than me, richer than me, and more important than me. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her brain in real time. My mother, Shirley, leaned forward, her face suddenly as pale as a sheet, the expensive foundation she wore unable to hide the absolute terror bleeding into her expression. "Are you serious, Tara?" She whispered, her carefully constructed elite composure cracking into a million tiny, unfixable pieces. She looked at the phone in my bag as if it were a loaded weapon. I smiled. A wide, genuine, deeply satisfied smile that conveyed exactly how serious I was and exactly how much power I truly held over their pathetic image-obsessed lives. I did not say anything else. I did not owe them an explanation, a debate, or a single second more of my precious time. I simply took Brielle's small hand, turned my back on the most toxic people I had ever known, and walked out of the dining room with my head held high. As I moved purposefully through the grand, marble-floored foyer, grabbing my daughter's light jacket from the coat rack, I could hear the immediate violent eruption of absolute chaos behind me. Preston was shouting frantically, his voice cracking as he panicked about his ruined investors and the millions of dollars he was about to lose. Vanessa was screaming hysterically, wailing about her destroyed social reputation and how she would be a laughingstock in their elite circle. My father, Desmond, was roaring over both of them, demanding loudly to know what just happened and how a dropout could possibly wield that kind of corporate authority. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the cool, refreshing evening air. The sound of their panic was like music to my ears. I securely buckled Brielle into the back seat of my reliable, unassuming sedan, giving her a reassuring kiss on the forehead. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I looked back at the sprawling estate one last time. I had just dismantled their entire summer, their business deals, and their fake reality in less than 60 seconds, and as I pulled out of the driveway, a profound sense of peace washed over me, because I knew this was only the very beginning of their spectacular, inevitable downfall. The tires of my sedan hummed quietly against the smooth asphalt as we pulled away from the gated community. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Brielle looking out the window. Her small shoulders were finally relaxing. I told her in a soft voice that she never had to worry about what her aunt said ever again. I promised her that we were going to build our own summer memories far away from people who did not understand her value. She smiled back at me and signed that she loved me. That simple, quiet moment in the car was worth more to me than any luxury property in my portfolio. I kept my breathing steady, focusing on the road ahead while my secure corporate cell phone began to vibrate violently in the center console. The screen lit up over and over again, displaying my mother's name, then my father's name, and finally a barrage of incoming calls from Vanessa. I did not answer a single one of them. I let the phone vibrate until it finally went dark, knowing exactly the kind of panicked frenzy that was taking place back in that formal dining room. My family had spent decades operating under the assumption that I was weak and defenseless. They had built an entire false hierarchy with Vanessa at the absolute top and me at the very bottom. Now the foundation of their delusional reality was cracking, and they had no idea how to stop it. When we finally reached our quiet neighborhood, I parked the car in the garage and helped Brielle inside. I settled her into the living room with her favorite book and a warm cup of cocoa, ensuring she felt completely safe and loved. Only then did I walk into my home office and pick up my phone to review the damage. There were 14 missed calls and 6 frantic voicemails. I pressed play on the first message and put it on speaker. My mother's frantic voice filled the quiet room, demanding that I pick up the phone immediately. She said I was acting completely unhinged and that my little prank was not funny anymore. She ordered me to call the concierge desk back and apologize for pretending to have authority over their reservation. The delusion was truly staggering. Even after witnessing me directly command a luxury concierge, she still desperately wanted to believe it was just a pathetic bluff. I deleted the message and moved to the next one. This one was from my father. His tone was dark and threatening. He told me I was deeply embarrassing the family and jeopardizing a multi-million-dollar financial deal for Preston. He said if I did not fix this fake cancellation nonsense immediately, I would be permanently disowned and cut out of their lives forever. I actually smiled at that threat. They could not cut me out because I had already walked away. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure administrative backend of the Platinum Luxury Estates portal. As the chief executive officer, I had real-time access to every single user action across our entire global network. I navigated to the guest profile for Preston and Vanessa. The screen displayed a satisfying red banner across their names indicating they were permanently banned from all properties. I clicked on the active user logs and watched the digital footprint of their absolute panic unfolding in real time. Preston was currently trying to access the client portal from his mobile device. I could see the repeated login attempts registering on my screen, one after another in rapid succession. He was typing in his credentials over and over again, clearly refusing to accept the reality of the situation. The system automatically generated an access-denied error code for each attempt. I watched as he tried to bypass the security wall by attempting to create a brand new account using a different email address. My security protocols immediately flagged the matching name and financial information, instantly blocking the new account creation. The desperation in his digital actions was palpable. He was a man who relied entirely on the illusion of extreme wealth and elite access to manipulate his investors. Without that Oak Bluffs mansion, his carefully curated image was completely worthless. The voicemails continued to roll in. I played the fourth one and heard Vanessa's shrill, hysterical voice. She was screaming into the receiver, demanding to know how I had managed to hack into the reservation system. She accused me of committing cybercrimes and threatened to have Preston call the federal authorities. In the background of the voicemail, I could hear Preston shouting at someone on his own phone. His voice was frantic and pitched high with pure anxiety. He was yelling at a customer support representative for my company, demanding to speak to a manager and claiming he was a highly important platinum tier client who was being unfairly targeted by a system glitch. I listened to him threaten the poor representative with a massive lawsuit claiming he knew the owners of the company and would have everyone fired by morning. The sheer irony of his threats was almost too delicious to handle. He was threatening to call the owner of the company to complain about a ban that the owner had just personally initiated. I sat back in my leather office chair and watched the system logs continue to update. Preston had given up on the website and was now attempting to force a new booking through a third-party luxury travel agency. I watched the API request hit our servers. The travel agency was attempting to secure a different property in the Martha Vineyard area under Preston name, using his corporate black card. I casually typed a quick command into my administrative dashboard, creating a global block on his name across all our affiliated partner networks. The system immediately rejected the third-party request, returning a code that classified the client as a severe financial insecurity risk. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a text message from my mother. It was a long, rambling paragraph accusing me of being jealous of Vanessa's successful marriage and Preston's incredible wealth. She said I was a bitter, divorced woman who could not stand to see her sister happy. She commanded me to stop this embarrassing behavior and fix the reservation before Preston investors found out, and the entire family was humiliated in front of the local high society. I did not type a single word in response. I simply took a screenshot of her message and saved it in a secure folder. I knew they would eventually try to spin this entire situation to make themselves look like the victims, so documenting their escalating harassment was a necessary precaution. The reality of their situation was finally beginning to set in for them. Another voicemail arrived, this one from Preston himself. I listened as the arrogant finance executive struggled to maintain his usual condescending tone. He tried to sound calm and authoritative, but the underlying tremor of absolute panic betrayed him completely. He told me that whatever game I was playing, it was going to cost him a critical business deal. He said he did not know how I had tricked the concierge desk, but he was willing to pay me $5,000 to call them back and clear up the misunderstanding. He actually thought he could buy his way out of the consequences with a pathetic bribe. He thought I was just a desperate poor relative who would jump at the chance to make a few $1,000s. He had absolutely no idea that the luxury watch currently sitting on my wrist was worth more than his entire liquid portfolio. I walked out of my office and checked on Brielle. She was fast asleep on the couch, her breathing soft and steady. I gently brushed a stray curl from her forehead and pulled a warm blanket over her small shoulders. Looking at her peaceful face, I felt a profound sense of validation. For years, I had endured my family toxic behavior because a small, naive part of me believed that keeping the peace was the right thing to do. I had swallowed their insults and ignored their blatant favoritism because I wanted Brielle to have a relationship with her grandparents and her aunt. But tonight had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were utterly incapable of loving her properly. They viewed her hearing impairment as a social defect, an embarrassing flaw that needed to be hidden away from their wealthy white investors. They were willing to discard a sweet, innocent child just to maintain an illusion of perfection. I walked into my kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I leaned against the marble counter and thought about the absolute devastation that was currently tearing through my parents' pristine dining room. I could picture the scene perfectly. Vanessa was likely pacing the floor, pulling at her hair, and weeping about her ruined summer plans. Preston was probably pacing right alongside her, sweating through his expensive suit as he realized his crucial investment deal was collapsing before his very eyes. Desmond and Shirley were undoubtedly sitting at the table, clutching their pearls and mourning the sudden loss of their highly respected social status. They had spent their entire lives treating me like garbage, and now they were choking on the consequences of their own cruelty. I returned to my office and checked the system logs one final time before shutting down my laptop. Preston had made 27 separate attempts to access the booking portal within the last 2 hours. He had tried 3 different credit cards, 2 different email addresses, and even attempted to use my mother name to bypass the security block. Every single attempt had been systematically, automatically, and ruthlessly denied by the custom security parameters I had set in place. The reality was undeniable and inescapable. There was absolutely no way they were getting into that beach house or any other property associated with my brand. Their luxurious summer vacation was officially dead and buried. My phone screen lit up with one last text message for the night. It was from Vanessa. The message was short, completely devoid of her usual punctuation, and dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. She wrote that I was going to pay for ruining her life, and that she would make sure everyone in our social circle knew exactly what a terrible, jealous sister I truly was. She promised to destroy my reputation and leave me with absolutely nothing. I read the message twice. I felt no fear, no anxiety, and no regret. I simply placed the phone on my desk and turned off the office light. Vanessa thought she was dealing with the timid, obedient sister she had bullied for decades. She thought she could control the narrative and rally their elite community against me. She had no idea that she had just declared war on a woman who held more power, wealth, and influence than her entire social circle combined. The night was over, but the true reckoning had barely even begun. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, feeling a deep, quiet sense of anticipation for the morning. They wanted to play a game of reputations and resources, and I was more than ready to show them exactly how out of their league they truly were. This was no longer just about a canceled vacation. This was about dismantling a lifetime of toxic behavior and protecting my daughter from people who viewed her as less than human. I fell asleep to the quiet hum of the city outside my window, dreaming of the spectacular, inevitable collapse of their fragile, fake empire. The next few days were going to be incredibly revealing, and I was going to enjoy every single moment of their desperate, arrogant scrambling. The trap had been set, the bait had been taken, and all I had to do now was watch them slowly pull the walls down on their own heads. The morning sun streamed through the large bay windows of my kitchen, casting a warm golden glow across the hardwood floors. I stood at the marble island preparing a simple, healthy breakfast for Brielle. She sat at the counter coloring in her sketchbook, completely oblivious to the digital war currently raging inside my pocket. My phone had not stopped vibrating since 6 o'clock in the morning. The family group chat, which I had muted months ago, was now sitting at 99 unread messages. I poured a cup of black coffee and finally unlocked the screen to witness the absolute meltdown taking place. My father Desmond had initiated the barrage of text messages at the crack of dawn. His words were heavy with his usual demanding authority. He ordered me to immediately call the luxury rental agency and beg for forgiveness. He said I was a profound embarrassment to the entire Washington family legacy and that my petty, jealous actions were actively destroying my sister's social standing. He demanded that I drive back to their estate, apologize to Vanessa on my hands and knees, and fix the monumental mess I had created. He claimed I was acting like a bitter child who wanted to ruin a highly important business opportunity simply because I was jealous of a successful marriage. My mother Shirley took a different but equally toxic approach. She flooded the chat with long, winding paragraphs dripping with emotional manipulation. She typed that her blood pressure was dangerously high and that my cruel behavior was literally making her physically ill. She said she had barely slept a single wink because she was so incredibly stressed about Preston important investors. She accused me of being an angry, lonely woman who wanted to tear down everyone else just to make myself feel better about my own miserable life. She ended her tirade by saying she was praying for my deeply troubled soul and begging me to stop acting like a failure. Vanessa, of course, was the most unhinged. Her messages were typed entirely in capital letters filled with dramatic accusations and wild threats. She called me a pathetic loser, a high school dropout, and a terrible mother. She said I was intentionally trying to sabotage her perfect, beautiful life because no decent man would ever want me. She threatened to sue me for emotional distress and claimed she would make sure Brielle never got to attend any elite private schools in the city. The sheer audacity of bringing my sweet, innocent daughter into her pathetic temper tantrum only solidified my absolute resolve. She truly believed her elite status made her untouchable, but she was about to learn a very hard lesson. Then came the messages from Preston. His texts were brief, arrogant, and dripping with white male privilege. He told the family to stop wasting their breath on me. He typed that I was clearly too uneducated and financially illiterate to comprehend the gravity of a multi-million-dollar corporate investment. He assured my parents and Vanessa that he was taking total control of the situation. He boasted that he dealt with incompetent service workers all the time and that he would simply call the management company himself, flex his financial muscles, and demand that the reservation be reinstated with a complimentary upgrade for their inconvenience. He actually promised my parents that he would have the employee who canceled their booking fired by the end of the business day. I read his arrogant words and took a slow sip of my hot coffee. The utter delusion of this man was almost comical. He truly believed he could simply shout at a customer service agent and magically restore a booking that the chief executive officer had personally ordered destroyed. I placed the phone face down on the counter, refusing to type a single letter in response. I was not going to engage in their petty digital brawl. I calmly finished making breakfast and sat down to eat with Brielle, enjoying the peaceful quiet of our safe, happy home. Let them scream into the digital void. I had a multi-million-dollar luxury empire to run. After dropping Brielle off at her specialized summer day camp where she was celebrated and supported, I drove to my corporate headquarters in downtown Boston. The glass and steel building towered over the city, a physical manifestation of everything I had built from absolutely nothing. I took the private elevator to my corner office on the top floor. The space was sleek, modern, and completely secure. My executive assistant handed me a fresh coffee and a tablet containing the morning financial reports. The business was thriving, but my mind was entirely focused on the trap I had set the night before. I sat at my expansive desk and logged into my secure communication terminal. Almost immediately, a direct message popped up on my screen from David, the senior concierge manager I had spoken to the previous evening. His message was brief but highly urgent. He wrote that an extremely irate individual named Preston was currently on the main priority line. David explained that the caller was screaming aggressively, using highly offensive language, and demanding to speak to the highest level executive available. David noted that the caller was threatening massive legal action and claiming personal friendships with powerful politicians. I smiled a slow, deeply satisfied smile. Preston had taken the bait exactly as I anticipated. I typed a quick response to David, instructing him to route the incoming call directly to my personal secure extension. I explicitly ordered David not to announce my name or title. He was simply to transfer the hostile caller to the executive escalation line. I then pressed the button on my terminal to mute my own microphone, ensuring that Preston would not be able to hear me breathing or typing. I put on my noise-canceling headset and waited. The line clicked as the transfer went through. Before I could even hear the background noise of his environment, Preston was already shouting into the receiver. His voice was loud, abrasive, and completely out of control. He demanded to know who he was speaking to. When I remained absolutely silent, letting the dead air stretch out, he only grew more infuriated. He yelled that he was Preston, a senior managing director at a top-tier financial firm, and that his time was worth more than the entire customer service department combined. He screamed that some incompetent idiot had mistakenly canceled his VIP reservation for the Oak Bluffs estate, and he demanded it be reinstated immediately. I sat back in my chair, resting my hands on my desk, and listened to a grown man throw a spectacular temper tantrum. Preston threatened to sue the company for breach of contract. He threatened to go to the media and ruin our brand reputation. He name-dropped several prominent local politicians and wealthy business owners, claiming he would personally see to it that our luxury properties were shut down by city inspectors. He demanded free additional days and an instant apology from the board of directors. The sheer volume of his unearned arrogance was staggering. He was weaponizing his race, his gender, and his perceived elite status to bully someone he assumed was just a low-paid anonymous worker. But as the seconds ticked by and my line remained perfectly dead and silent, his aggressive energy began to change. The loud, booming threats slowly morphed into a frantic, desperate kind of rambling. He started pacing, and I could hear his heavy footsteps echoing on a hard floor. He asked if anyone was there, his voice cracking slightly. He demanded an answer, but his tone was no longer commanding. It was panicked. He was spiraling entirely out of control, and the silence was breaking his mind. Then he did exactly what arrogant, desperate men always do when they feel their power slipping away. He started over, explaining his situation, trying to justify his demands to the empty air. He breathed heavily into the phone, and his words became a rapid, disjointed stream of consciousness. "You have to fix this," he begged the silence, his voice trembling with genuine raw fear. "You do not understand what is happening. I need this specific house. I have to have the Oak Bluffs property for this weekend. The investors are already flying in from New York. If I do not host them at this exact estate, the entire deal is dead." I leaned closer to the monitor, completely captivated by the absolute destruction of his facade. Preston let out a shaky, desperate sound that was half sob and half gasp. He continued speaking to the silent line, spilling his darkest, most heavily guarded secrets. "The firm is bleeding money." He confessed, his words rushing out in a terrified whisper. "We are completely underwater. I am drowning in massive debt. I leveraged everything on this single acquisition fund. If these guys do not see that I have elite access, if they do not believe I am part of this wealthy inner circle, they will never sign the contracts. They will pull out, and I am completely finished. I will be totally bankrupt. I will lose everything." He was practically hyperventilating now, begging an anonymous customer service line to save his entire pathetic, fraudulent life. He admitted that his massive wealth was nothing but a fragile illusion built on stolen time and extreme debt. He confessed that without the social clout of my family and the prestige of that specific beach house, his investors would see right through his fake wealthy persona. I sat in my luxurious corner office, listening to the man who had mocked my beautiful daughter slowly unravel into a pathetic, whimpering mess. I did not speak a single word. I did not end the call. I simply sat there in the absolute silence, absorbing the incredibly valuable, devastating information he had just freely handed me. He thought he was screaming at a helpless employee, but he had just given the true owner of the company the exact weapon needed to completely and utterly destroy his entire fake life. I disconnected the call, leaving him to babble his pathetic threats into the dead, empty air. A profound sense of calm washed over my entire body as I sat back in my leather executive chair and watched the glowing digital dashboard on my massive monitor. Preston was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always make incredibly desperate, fatal mistakes. It took him exactly 14 minutes to abandon his screaming temper tantrum and shift his focus to his next strategy. The administrative system pinged with a new high-priority alert signaling that a brand new user profile was being generated in real time on our public-facing booking portal. The applicant name was listed as a generic corporate entity, an obscure-sounding holding company supposedly registered in Delaware. He was attempting to use a fake shell company to completely bypass the global security block I had personally placed on his identity. It was a classic predictable finance bro maneuver, attempting to hide behind layers of meaningless corporate paperwork to sneak through the back door. But my luxury hospitality group catered exclusively to the international elite, and our digital security protocols were specifically designed to vet billionaires and foreign dignitaries. A hastily thrown together fake limited liability company was not going to fool my advanced risk management software for a single second. I watched the screen as he selected the Oak Bluffs estate for the exact same summer dates, rapidly filling out the guest list with fake generic names to obscure the fact that Vanessa and my parents were the actual intended guests. He navigated swiftly to the payment gateway to finalize the fraudulent booking. This was the moment of absolute truth. He inputted a premium corporate credit card into the billing section. The system processed the request, querying the global banking network to authorize the massive luxury charge. A bright red error code flashed violently across my screen. Declined for insufficient funds. I could almost picture the cold sweat beading on his forehead as he stared at his own computer screen in sheer terror. Less than a minute later, he frantically deleted the first card and tried a second one. This one was a high-tier personal rewards card, the kind that required a massive annual fee just to carry in your wallet. The system processed the numbers again. The screen flashed red once more. Declined for exceeding the maximum credit limit. The digital footprint of his absolute financial ruin was laying itself bare right in front of my eyes in real time. He tried a third card, then a fourth, then a fifth. Each and every single attempt was met with the exact same ruthless digital rejection. These were the heavy premium metal credit cards he casually tossed onto the table at expensive family dinners just to impress my father. These were the accounts that supposedly funded Vanessa and her endless designer wardrobe, her expensive cars, and their lavish, untouchable lifestyle. They were all completely maxed out, drained entirely dry by a man desperately trying to maintain a facade of generational wealth that he could no longer afford to finance. I clicked deeper into the payment analytics to view the raw financial data generated by the rejections. The error codes told a complete and devastating story about my arrogant brother-in-law. He was not just low on liquid cash for the month, he was entirely underwater and drowning in debt. Some of the credit cards were carrying astronomical balances that had triggered immediate fraud prevention locks from his own banks due to massive unpaid minimum monthly payments. He was a walking financial disaster, teetering on the absolute edge of total bankruptcy. The irony of the situation was thick and suffocating. My parents had spent my entire adult life treating me like a destitute failure who needed their constant pity and supervision. They had mocked my quiet lifestyle and my decision to leave a prestigious law program. At the same time, they had eagerly welcomed a man who was literally bankrupt into their elite inner circle simply because he possessed the right skin color to grant them access to white elite spaces and the right arrogant attitude to match their own terrible values. Preston had convinced my parents and my sister that he was their golden ticket to the highest echelons of society, but his pockets were completely empty. I watched his sixth payment attempt fail miserably. The system logged a frantic secondary error as his primary financial institution placed a hard security hold on all of his accounts due to the rapid succession of high-dollar international declines. He was officially entirely out of options. His own banks had permanently locked him out of his own money. There was a long, heavy pause in the system activity. 10 minutes passed in total silence, then 20 minutes. I sat in my quiet office and imagined him pacing the floor of his luxury apartment, the walls closing in rapidly as the reality of his ruined investment deal crushed the breath right out of his lungs. He needed this specific beach house to secure the billionaire investors he had promised to host. Without those wealthy investors, his struggling firm would inevitably collapse. Without the firm, the elite lifestyle he had promised my sister would vanish overnight, leaving them exposed to the harsh judgment of the society they worshipped. He had reached the absolute edge of the cliff, and he was looking straight down into the abyss of his own failures. Then the payment gateway on my screen lit up again with a fresh alert. He was not trying another maxed-out credit card this time. He was attempting to process a direct electronic wire transfer for a massive non-refundable security deposit to force the system to accept the booking. It was a bold, incredibly risky move to push the reservation through the system manually without a standard credit authorization. I closely monitored the incoming routing numbers as the bank verification software kicked into gear. The system performed a routine identity match to ensure the name on the shell company aligned with the origin of the wired funds. A bright yellow warning banner appeared on my dashboard highlighting a stark critical discrepancy in the financial data. The funds were not coming from Preston corporate accounts. They were not coming from his personal savings or a joint account he shared with Vanessa. The wire transfer was originating from a private secure retirement portfolio managed by a completely different local financial institution. I ran a quick trace on the account holder name associated with the routing number. My breath hitched in my throat and my blood ran completely cold as the identity resolved on the computer screen. The account belonged to Shirley Washington, my mother. Preston was not just desperate anymore. He was actively committing grand larceny. In his sheer blind terror of looking like a failure to his elite investors and his image-obsessed in-laws, he had somehow gained access to my mother's highly sensitive financial information. He was draining her carefully guarded retirement savings to pay for a luxury vacation rental just to keep up his fraudulent facade for one more weekend. He was stealing the very money my parents had hoarded their entire lives, the wealth they constantly bragged about at social gatherings, to prove their superiority over people like me. He initiated the wire transfer, pushing the massive sum of money directly into my corporate holding account. He was committing a severe federal crime by stealing from an elderly family member, and I had the digital receipts capturing every single second of the illegal transaction. I immediately locked the incoming funds in a secure holding escrow. I would absolutely not let my company be a party to his massive financial fraud, but I desperately needed the undeniable proof of his crime fully documented for the federal authorities. I downloaded the entire transaction log, ensuring that his internet protocol addressed the timestamps and the routing numbers were preserved in pristine condition. I picked up my personal cell phone, feeling the immense heavy weight of the absolute destruction I now held in my hands. The family group chat, which had been quiet for the past hour, suddenly sparked to life with a brand new notification. I opened the message thread to see what was happening. It was a long, triumphant text from Preston aimed at the entire family. He wrote that the terrible crisis had been completely averted. He fed them an elaborate, spectacular lie, claiming that the luxury rental agency had experienced a massive, catastrophic system failure that had accidentally deleted their reservation due to an incompetent employee. He boasted that he had been forced to pull some major strings with the highest-level executives in the city to bypass the massive waitlist and secure the property. He typed that because the beach house was in such incredibly high demand, he had generously paid triple the original price entirely out of his own pocket just to secure the estate and save the family summer trip from my jealous, messy interference. The responses from my family flooded into the group chat almost instantly. My mother sent a long string of prayer hands and heart emojis, praising him endlessly for being such a strong, reliable provider for her daughter. She typed that he was the true rock of the entire family, and that they were all so incredibly blessed to have such a successful, generous son-in-law protecting them from my toxic negative drama. My father chimed in, echoing the absolute adoration and blind respect. He called Preston a brilliant operator who knew exactly how to handle high-pressure situations, and casually added that I could learn a lot about real success from watching how a true professional navigated the business world. Vanessa sent a sickeningly sweet message, bragging about how her husband always spoiled her beyond belief and how sorry she felt for me, because I would never know what it was like to be taken care of by a real wealthy man. I sat alone in my secure office reading their pathetic, delusional praises, as they practically worshipped the very man who had just secretly robbed them completely blind. They were actively celebrating their own financial execution, praising the thief who had just drained their life savings to fund his desperate lies. They were thanking him for stealing their future. I slowly locked my phone, setting it down on the smooth glass of my desk. The trap was now fully loaded and armed. The beach house awaited their arrival, and they had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into a meticulously designed federal crime scene that would tear their entire fake reality to shreds. The days leading up to the second week of July moved with a slow, deliberate grace. I had packed my bags and flown out to Martha Vineyard a full week ahead of schedule, wanting to ensure that every single detail of the property was in absolutely perfect condition. Oak Bluffs has always been a sanctuary of elite Black excellence, a historic coastal enclave where generational wealth and deep cultural roots have intertwined for over a century. My estate was the undeniable crown jewel of the island, perched on a heavily wooded private bluff overlooking the deep, rich blue waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The massive wrought iron gates at the entrance of the long, sweeping driveway stood over 12 feet tall, deliberately designed to keep unwanted eyes and unwanted drama far away from the sanctuary I had built. The main house was a sprawling, modern coastal fortress, constructed of weathered cedar shingles and floor-to-ceiling glass panels that offered completely unobstructed views of the water from every single room. Brielle and I settled into a beautiful, peaceful summer rhythm almost immediately. There was no screaming, no constant comparisons, and absolutely no toxic remarks about her hearing aid or her social etiquette. There was only the soothing sound of the ocean breeze rustling through the hydrangeas and the distant calls of seagulls echoing in the clear morning air. I spent my days managing my global corporate empire from a sun-drenched home office, while Brielle spent her time exploring the private beach, collecting seashells, and learning how to swim in the massive infinity pool that seemed to drop off directly into the ocean. On the morning of their scheduled arrival, the weather was absolutely flawless. The sky was a brilliant, vibrant blue without a single cloud in sight, and the summer heat was perfectly balanced by a cool, steady ocean breeze. I had dressed in a pristine white designer swimsuit, paired with a lightweight silk cover-up and oversized dark sunglasses. I was lounging comfortably on a custom teak daybed positioned right at the edge of the infinity pool, holding a tall glass of iced sparkling water with fresh lemon. Brielle was happily splashing in the shallow end of the pool, wearing a bright yellow, floaty suit, her joyful laughter ringing out like music over the water. She was completely safe, entirely relaxed, and blissfully unaware of the absolute hurricane of chaos that was currently barreling toward our front gates. I knew their exact timeline because my private security team, led by a highly trained former military contractor named Julian, was monitoring the island ferry manifests and the local traffic cameras. I knew exactly when their rented luxury sport utility vehicle rolled off the ferry and touched the island pavement. I could perfectly picture the suffocating atmosphere inside that vehicle. Preston would be sweating through his expensive linen suit, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, terrified that his stolen funds and his fraudulent booking might somehow fall apart before his billionaire investors arrived. Vanessa would be sitting in the passenger seat wearing a loud, overly branded designer outfit, obsessively checking her reflection in the mirror and preparing to take hundreds of photos for her social media accounts to prove her superior social standing. In the back seat, my parents Desmond and Shirley would be sitting with perfect, rigid posture, wearing their most expensive country club attire, fully prepared to sip vintage champagne, and look down their noses at anyone who did not meet their impossible standards of respectability. My secure tablet chimed softly on the small table next to my lounge chair. Julian sent a brief text notification stating that the target vehicle had just turned onto the private access road leading up to the estate. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my iced water and watched Brielle dive playfully beneath the surface of the pool. The trap was finally springing shut. At the end of the long, winding driveway, the heavy wrought iron gates remained completely closed and locked. The rented black vehicle pulled up to the security checkpoint and came to a slow halt. Through the high-definition security cameras broadcasting directly to my tablet, I watched the entire scene unfold in crisp, clear resolution. Preston rolled down the driver's side window, resting his arm on the door panel and putting on his best arrogant finance executive face. Julian stepped out of the discreet security booth wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit and an earpiece, holding a digital tablet in his hands. Preston spoke with a loud, booming voice dripping with unearned white male privilege. He told Julian to open the gates immediately, stating that he was the primary guest for the week and that he was expecting highly important VIP visitors to arrive shortly. Julian did not even blink. He maintained a completely neutral, highly professional expression and asked for the name on the reservation. Preston practically shouted his full name, treating the simple request as a profound personal insult to his authority. Julian looked down at his tablet, tapping the screen a few times before looking back up at Preston. He spoke in a calm, measured tone, stating that there was no active reservation under that name. He informed Preston that the name provided was actually flagged on a permanent global restricted list and that they were trespassing on strictly private property. He politely but firmly asked them to turn the vehicle around and leave the premises immediately. I watched through this camera feed as the color completely drained from Preston's face. His carefully constructed, arrogant facade shattered into a million pieces, replacing his confident smirk with pure, unadulterated terror. He knew he had used Shirley's stolen retirement funds to force the booking, and he knew the transaction had been successfully processed by his bank. He could not comprehend how he was currently being denied entry. He started shouting at Julian, slapping his hand against the side of the car door. He screamed that he had paid triple the asking price for the week that he personally knew the owners of the management company, and that Julian would be fired and sued into bankruptcy before sunset. Julian simply stood there, completely unfazed by the aggressive tantrum. He repeated his instruction to leave the property, adding that if they did not comply, he would be forced to contact local law enforcement to have them removed for criminal trespassing. The commotion was loud enough to alert the other passengers in the vehicle. The passenger side door swung open and Vanessa stepped out onto the paved driveway. She was wearing a massive floppy sun hat and oversized sunglasses, looking entirely ridiculous as she marched up to the security booth. She started screaming at Julian, demanding to know if he had any idea who they were. She shouted that her family was one of the most prominent, respected families in Boston, and that they did not tolerate being treated like common criminals by hired help. She waved her manicured hands in the air, demanding that Julian open the gates right this second, because her husband was hosting billionaires who would destroy his entire career. The noise and the sheer embarrassment of a public altercation finally prompted my parents to intervene. Desmond and Shirley stepped out of the back doors of the vehicle, looking around nervously to see if any of the wealthy neighbors from the adjacent estates were watching this humiliating display. Desmond adjusted his suit jacket and tried to use his commanding patriarch voice to take control of the situation. He told Julian that there had obviously been a terrible administrative mistake and that they were willing to overlook the severe disrespect if the gates were opened immediately. Shirley stood behind him, clutching her designer purse to her chest, looking absolutely mortified that her elite family was currently shouting at a security guard on the side of a road. Julian remained a completely immovable wall of professionalism. He stated clearly that there was no mistake. He informed them that the financial transaction attempted by Preston had been flagged as highly fraudulent by the Corporate Security Office and that the funds had been frozen pending a federal investigation. I could see the exact moment the word fraudulent hit my parents' ears. Desmond turned slowly to look at Preston, his eyes narrowing with sudden dark suspicion. Shirley clutched her purse tighter, a look of deep confusion crossing her face. Preston started stammering wildly, backing away from my father and insisting that the security guard was lying. He babbled that the system was broken and that he would call his bank right now to prove his massive wealth. As the argument at the gate escalated into a full-blown chaotic screaming match, Vanessa grew tired of dealing with Julian. She walked right up to the heavy wrought iron gates and gripped the metal bars, peering through them to look down the long sweeping driveway. The architecture of the estate was specifically designed to offer a clear, direct line of sight from the front gates all the way down the driveway, through the glass-walled main house, and out to the infinity pool overlooking the ocean. I watched her on the camera feed as she pressed her face against the iron bars, squinting against the bright summer sun. It took her a few seconds to focus past the lush landscaping and the grand architecture. First, she saw the bright yellow, floaty suit bobbing in the crystal-clear water of the infinity pool. She recognized Brielle immediately. Then her gaze shifted slightly to the left landing directly on the custom teak daybed. She saw the pristine white designer swimsuit, the dark, oversized sunglasses, and the relaxed, effortless posture of a woman who owned the world. She saw me. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She froze, completely paralyzed, gripping the iron bars so tightly, her knuckles turned stark white. Her mouth fell open in a silent scream of absolute disbelief. She realized in that exact horrifying second that her poor, struggling divorced sister, the sister she had mocked and degraded her entire life, was currently lounging inside the multi-million-dollar fortress that had just ruthlessly rejected her. Vanessa turned her head toward the security intercom system mounted on the stone pillar next to the gates. She reached out with a trembling hand and slammed her palm against the call button. Her voice erupted from the high-definition speakers strategically placed around my pool deck, cutting through the peaceful sounds of the ocean. She screamed my name with a level of pure, unhinged hysteria that echoed across the water. She demanded to know what I was doing inside her luxury rental. She shrieked that I must have broken into the property out of pure, bitter jealousy. She yelled that I was a psychotic criminal for trespassing and that she was going to have me arrested and thrown in jail for ruining her perfect summer. The sound of her screaming drew the attention of the rest of the family. Desmond, Shirley, and Preston rushed to the gates, pressing themselves against the iron bars to see what Vanessa was looking at. Through the camera feed, I watched all four of their faces contort with a mixture of profound shock, absolute outrage, and deep, terrifying confusion. Desmond leaned into the intercom, his voice trembling with a level of rage I had never heard from him before. He roared through the speakers, telling me that I had finally gone completely insane. He demanded that I pack up my things, grab my disabled child, and walk out of those gates right this instant. He threatened to call the police himself and tell them I was a dangerous intruder. He screamed that if I embarrassed the family in front of Preston important investors, he would completely disown me, strip my name from the family records, and ensure I never saw a single penny of inheritance. He bellowed that I was dead to him if I did not immediately surrender the property to my sister. I sat comfortably on my teak daybed, feeling the warm summer sun kissing my skin. I did not flinch at the sound of my father's roaring voice. I did not jump up to defend myself or run toward the gates to argue with their delusional demands. I simply reached a lazy hand out to the small table beside me. I picked up my tall glass of iced sparkling water, feeling the cool condensation against my palm. I slowly lowered my dark sunglasses just enough to look directly down the long, sweeping driveway, making absolutely sure that all four of them could clearly see my eyes through the iron gates. I looked at the pathetic, desperate group of people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I raised my glass in the air, offering them a silent mocking toast from my luxury throne. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my lemon water, slid my sunglasses back up the bridge of my nose, picked up my hardcover book, and completely ignored them. The loud, hysterical screaming from the front gates had become nothing more than background noise to the peaceful rhythm of the ocean waves crashing against the bluffs below my property. I sat comfortably on my teak daybed, feeling the warm summer sun on my skin, entirely unbothered by the pathetic display of entitlement happening at the edge of my estate. But my serene moment of quiet victory was about to be elevated to an entirely new level of satisfaction. Through the high-definition security feed on my tablet, I watched as the dusty local road leading up to the estate suddenly filled with a convoy of vehicles. 3 massive, sleek black Escalades rolled into view, moving with the heavy, synchronized precision that only came with elite private security details. The heavy tires crunched loudly against the pristine white gravel of my private access road, pulling up right behind the rented luxury vehicle my family had arrived in. These were not lost tourists. These were the billionaire investors from New York. Preston highly important VIP guests had arrived exactly on schedule, fully expecting to be ushered into a world of exclusive luxury and coastal elegance. I watched the camera feed with absolute fascination as the dynamic at the security gate shifted in the blink of an eye. The moment Preston saw those black Escalades pull up, his entire body seized with pure, unadulterated terror. He practically tripped over his own expensive leather shoes as he scrambled away from the wrought iron gates. The arrogant finance executive who had just been screaming obscenities at my security guard was now frantically trying to smooth down the wrinkled lapels of his sweat-soaked linen suit. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, desperately trying to compose himself and project the image of a wealthy, relaxed host welcoming his affluent peers to his summer home. The transformation of my parents was equally pathetic to witness. Desmond and Shirley immediately stopped their indignant shouting. They snapped to attention, straightening their country club attire and pasting on the most painfully fake, rigid smiles I had ever seen. Shirley quickly wiped the angry sweat from her forehead and adjusted her pearl necklace, attempting to look like the dignified matriarch of a powerful family. Desmond stood tall, puffing out his chest and trying to exude an aura of old money respectability, completely ignoring the glaringly obvious fact that they were currently locked out on the side of a dusty road. Vanessa hastily shoved her oversized sunglasses back onto her face, trying to hide her red, puffy eyes, and forced a wide, unnatural grin, hoping to look like the perfect high society wife. The driver of the lead Escalade stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. A tall, distinguished older man with silver hair stepped out onto the gravel wearing a perfectly tailored navy summer suit. This was the lead investor, the man whose signature Preston desperately needed to save his failing financial firm. He looked around the beautifully landscaped entrance, his eyes tracing the towering stone pillars and the heavy locked iron gates before finally landing on the sweaty, frantic mess that was my brother-in-law. Preston rushed forward with his hand outstretched, offering a loud, booming greeting that sounded completely hollow. He welcomed the investor to Martha Vineyard, forcing a hearty laugh and apologizing for the slight delay at the entrance. Through the sensitive audio feed from the security booth, I could hear Preston spinning a desperate, pathetic lie. He told the investor that there was simply a minor technical glitch with the estate advanced security software and that the staff was just being overly cautious because of the high-profile nature of their visit. He promised they would be inside enjoying vintage champagne by the infinity pool in just a few short minutes. The investor did not smile. He looked at the locked gates, then at the completely unmoved security guard Julian, and finally back at Preston. He was a man who dealt in billions of dollars, and he could smell desperation and incompetence from a mile away. He asked politely but firmly why the host of the weekend was standing in the dirt driveway instead of waiting inside the property. I decided in that exact moment that it was time to end the show. I set my glass of iced lemon water down on the side table and stood up from my daybed. I wrapped my sheer white silk cover up around my waist, letting it flow elegantly in the ocean breeze. I leaned down and told Brielle to stay right there and finish coloring her beautiful picture, promising her I would be right back. I slipped on my designer sandals and began the long, deliberate walk down the sweeping stone driveway toward the front gates. Every single step I took felt incredibly powerful. I was not the scared, intimidated sister who used to shrink under their constant criticism. I was a highly successful chief executive officer walking across the grounds of a multi-million-dollar fortress that I owned completely outright. I could see them through the iron bars as I approached. Preston saw me first. His eyes bugged out of his head and the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He stepped close to the bars, his back turned to the investor, and began whisper shouting at me through the iron grate. He begged me to go away, his voice cracking with raw panic. He promised he would pay me anything I wanted if I just opened the gates and played along for the weekend. He pleaded that his entire life was on the line. Vanessa crowded in right beside him, her fake smile dropping as she hissed at me to stop ruining her life and open the door. Desmond cleared his throat loudly enough for the investor to hear, and attempted to introduce me as his troubled, confused daughter, who was just leaving the premises. He was actually trying to convince a billionaire that I was a random trespasser wandering off the estate. I did not break my stride, and I did not acknowledge a single one of their desperate, pathetic pleas. I walked right up to the wrought iron gates and stopped. Julian stepped back slightly, giving me a respectful nod, confirming my absolute authority over the property. I looked directly past my sweating brother-in-law, past my furious sister, and past my mortified parents. I locked eyes completely with the silver-haired lead investor. I reached into the pocket of my silk cover-up and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with my corporate wax stamp. I slipped the envelope smoothly through the gaps in the iron bars, holding it out directly to the investor. He looked at me with mild curiosity before stepping around a sputtering Preston to accept the envelope. I spoke with a voice that was perfectly calm, crystal clear, and completely devoid of any emotion. I did not yell, and I did not gloat. I simply delivered the absolute unvarnished truth. We do not allow individuals with stolen credit cards and bankrupt portfolios on the premises. I stated my words, slicing through the warm summer air like a freshly sharpened blade. Preston let out a strangled, gasping sound. He tried to laugh it off, waving his hands frantically and telling the investor that I was just his unstable, bitter sister-in-law, making up wild stories because I was jealous of his success. But the investor was already opening the heavy envelope. Billionaires do not achieve their wealth by ignoring massive red flags, and this man was no exception. He pulled out the printed dossier I had prepared. The very first page was a crisp, clean copy of the property deed showing my name as the sole absolute owner of the estate. The second page was a printed log of the 6 different premium credit cards Preston had attempted to use that morning, all showing severe decline codes for insufficient funds and maximum limits reached. The final page was the most devastating piece of evidence of all. It was the digital receipt of the wire transfer, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Preston had stolen the reservation deposit directly from my mother's highly secure retirement account. The silence at the front gate was absolute and heavy. The only sound was the rustling of the expensive paper as the investor quickly scanned the undeniable proof of Preston's massive financial fraud. He did not need to ask any questions. The banking routing numbers, the decline codes, and the property deed told a complete bulletproof story of a desperate con artist trying to fake his way into an elite circle. The investor slowly lowered the papers. He looked at Preston, not with anger, but with a deep, profound, chilling disgust. Trust and discretion were the ultimate currency in their elite financial world, and Preston had just been exposed as a broke, desperate thief who stole from his own elderly in-laws to fund a fake lifestyle. The investor did not say a single word to my family. He simply turned his back on them, walked smoothly back to his black Escalade, and climbed into the rear passenger seat. He tapped the partition, and the driver immediately put the massive vehicle into gear. Without a moment of hesitation, the 3 sleek black SUVs executed a tight synchronized U-turn on the gravel road and drove away, leaving a cloud of white dust settling over my completely ruined family. The deal was completely dead. The fake empire had officially fallen. Preston's legs gave out from under him. He collapsed right there on the dusty gravel, falling to his knees and clutching his head in his hands as a loud, agonizing sob ripped from his throat. He had just watched his entire future drive away in those black SUVs, and he knew there was absolutely no coming back from this level of professional and public humiliation. Vanessa stood frozen, her designer sunglasses slipping down her nose as she stared at the empty road where the billionaires had just been. Her brain was slowly putting the pieces together. She looked down at the documents the investor had dropped on the ground in his haste to leave. She saw the wire transfer receipt showing her mother retirement account information. The realization hit her with brutal force. Her husband was not a wealthy, successful provider. He was a broke criminal who had just stolen her parents' life savings. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream and began hitting Preston on the shoulders, demanding to know where the money was and how he could do this to her perfect social image. Desmond and Shirley looked like they had physically aged 20 years in the span of 5 minutes. Shirley was trembling violently, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the banking receipt on the ground. She realized her secure retirement, the money she had hoarded and bragged about her entire life, had been completely drained by the white son-in-law she had worshipped and praised above her own flesh and blood. Desmond's chest was heaving, his face a dangerous shade of red, as he looked from the sobbing Preston to the hysterical Vanessa. The pristine, flawless family image he had spent his entire life cultivating had just been spectacularly publicly slaughtered in front of the most powerful people in New York. I did not stay to watch them tear each other apart in the dirt. I had delivered my message and my work at the gate was completely finished. I turned my back on their screaming matches and their pathetic sobbing, walking calmly back up the sweeping stone driveway toward my beautiful, peaceful sanctuary. They had nowhere to go. They were stranded on an expensive island during the peak of summer season with absolutely no reservation, no functioning credit cards, and a completely shattered reality. The exclusive hotels and resorts were fully booked months in advance, and even if there had been a single room available, Preston maxed out accounts would never cover the exorbitant nightly rates. Through the security cameras, I watched the pathetic conclusion to their highly anticipated luxury vacation. After 30 minutes of screaming, crying, and pointing fingers in the dirt driveway, they were forced to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of their situation. Desmond, looking completely defeated and hollowed out, practically shoved Preston into the rented vehicle. Shirley was weeping silently into her hands, her elite composure entirely destroyed by the theft of her life savings. Vanessa was a ruined mess. Her designer clothes covered in dust as she climbed into the passenger seat, realizing she was going back to a life of massive debt and impending bankruptcy. They drove away from the magnificent iron gates of my estate, retreating in absolute disgrace. With no money and no other options, they were forced to drive to the far side of the island, away from the elite coastal enclaves they so desperately wanted to belong to. They eventually pulled into the parking lot of a cheap, run-down roadside motel. It was a stark, depressing building with peeling paint, flickering neon signs, and loud, rattling air conditioning units hanging out of the windows. It was the ultimate profound humiliation for a family obsessed with high society aesthetics and elite respectability. They had packed their bags expecting to spend the week sipping vintage champagne by an oceanfront infinity pool while mocking my disabled daughter. Instead, they were spending the night crammed into a cheap, damp motel room with peeling wallpaper, listening to the traffic on the highway outside, perfectly aware that their entire fake wealthy existence had just been completely permanently destroyed by the daughter they had spent a lifetime trying to break. The morning sun crawled over the stained, peeling walls of the cheap roadside motel, illuminating the absolute ruin of my family summer vacation. I did not need to be in the cramped, damp room with them to know exactly how the morning was playing out. Vanessa had always been entirely incapable of sitting in silence with her own failures. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee back at my beautiful, peaceful estate, my secure corporate phone was already lighting up with a fresh, relentless wave of digital chaos. Vanessa had decided to go to war. Unable to process the fact that she was currently trapped in a dingy motel, while I lounged in a multi-million-dollar coastal fortress, she did what desperate image-obsessed people always do. She took out her smartphone and began spinning a massive, elaborate web of absolute fiction, She opened her social media account specifically targeting the highly exclusive private community groups dedicated to the elite Black Society of Boston and Martha Vineyard. These were carefully curated digital spaces filled with politicians, doctors, lawyers, and legacy families where social reputation was the ultimate undeniable currency. Through my secondary monitoring accounts, I watched her post go live. It was a massive, sprawling manifesto dripping with fake tears and highly calculated victimhood. She uploaded a photo of herself looking intentionally disheveled and devastated, sitting in the passenger seat of their rental car. The caption was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She claimed that her highly anticipated luxury family vacation had been brutally sabotaged by her deeply disturbed, estranged sister. She painted a picture of me that was so entirely unhinged it bordered on clinical insanity. She wrote that I was a bitter, jealous woman who could not handle the fact that my own marriage had failed while she had found a wealthy, successful husband. She lied effortlessly, claiming that I had somehow hacked into their travel itinerary, tracked them across the ocean, and intentionally broken into their vacation rental just to stage a dramatic confrontation at the gates. She told her thousands of wealthy followers that I was dangerously unstable and prone to violent outbursts of rage. But the most disgusting part of her digital performance was how she weaponized my beautiful daughter. Vanessa typed out a long paragraph claiming that I intentionally used Brielle and her hearing impairment to extort money from our parents. She wrote that I dragged my disabled child to the front gates of the estate, using her as a human shield to emotionally manipulate the security guards into kicking the rightful renters off the property. She begged the community to pray for my mental health and to pray for the safety of my poor innocent daughter who was trapped in the care of a psychotic mother. The sheer audacity of her lies made my blood run cold, but I did not react. I simply scrolled down to see the responses. It took less than 10 minutes for my parents to publicly co-sign her entire fabricated reality. Desmond wrote a long authoritative comment stating that he was officially and publicly severing all ties with his youngest daughter. He claimed that he had spent decades trying to fix my troubled mind and that my unprovoked attack on his son-in-law's prestigious business trip was the final straw. He told the community that the family was forced to retreat for their own physical safety. Shirley immediately followed up with a highly dramatic, emotionally manipulative comment of her own. She played the role of the heartbroken, long-suffering matriarch to absolute perfection. She typed that her heart was completely shattered by my cruel actions, and that she would be setting up a prayer circle at their country club to ask for divine intervention for my troubled soul. She actually thanked Preston for being such a strong, protective white knight who bravely shielded the family from my dangerous psychotic breakdown at the gates. She publicly praised the man who had just secretly robbed her blind. The elite community absolutely devoured the drama. Notifications flooded my screen as mutual acquaintances, former college friends, and distant relatives began sending me messages. Some demanded explanations, while others offered fake patronizing concern. They were all completely intoxicated by the scandal, eagerly tearing into my reputation, based entirely on a social media post written from a cheap motel parking lot. Vanessa was trying to burn my entire life to the ground. She wanted to make sure that I could never show my face in polite society ever again. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading every single hateful comment and every single pathetic lie. I felt a brief hot flash of anger demanding that I defend myself. The urge to post the real property deed, to upload the security footage of Preston crying in the dirt, and to publicly expose their complete financial ruin was incredibly strong. It would have been so easy to type out a response and destroy her narrative right then and there. But true power does not operate on impulse. Responding to her pathetic social media post would only drag me down into the mud with her, giving her the exact validation and attention she desperately craved. It would alert them to the fact that I was actively watching them, and it would give Preston a chance to formulate a defense. A brilliant chief executive officer does not argue with internet trolls. She builds an inescapable trap. I locked my phone, placed it silently face down on the marble kitchen island, and walked away from the digital noise. I had much more important high-stakes work to do. I left Brielle in the capable hands of my trusted private nanny and the estate security team, kissing her softly on the forehead before heading to the private helipad located just a few miles from the property. Within the hour, I was flying high above the Atlantic Ocean, leaving the island and my pathetic family far behind. I landed in Boston and was immediately ushered into the back of a waiting black town car, which drove me straight to my corporate headquarters in the financial district. I bypassed my regular corner office and walked directly into the secure, soundproof glass boardroom located on the restricted executive floor. The room was already buzzing with quiet, intense activity. Waiting for me around the massive mahogany conference table was my elite corporate legal team, two of the top forensic accountants in the city, and two plainclothes federal investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. I had called in every favor and utilized every ounce of my corporate influence to arrange this highly confidential meeting. I took my seat at the head of the table, smoothing down my tailored blazer. "We are not dealing with a simple family dispute, gentlemen," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "We are dealing with federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and a coordinated attempt to defraud billionaire investors using stolen retirement funds. I want every single digital footprint exposed." My lead forensic accountant, a brilliant, meticulous woman named Elena, projected a massive, complex financial diagram onto the screen at the end of the boardroom. The diagram mapped out Preston's entire corporate and personal financial history over the last 36 months. The sheer scale of his absolute financial destruction was breathtaking to behold. "Preston's firm is nothing but a hollow shell," Elena explained, tapping a laser pointer against a cluster of red warning indicators on the screen. "He has been systematically running a sophisticated shell game, moving highly leveraged debt from one corporate entity to another just to keep the lights on. His primary investment fund is completely insolvent. He owes tens of millions of dollars to institutional lenders, and his personal credit lines have been entirely exhausted for over 6 months." One of the federal investigators leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy mahogany table. "He is desperate," the investigator noted, analyzing the data with a sharp, trained eye. "Men like this, when they reach the end of their financial rope, they start looking for easy, vulnerable targets to cannibalize. That brings us to the wire transfer from your mother retirement account." Elena pulled up a new slide displaying the exact routing numbers and timestamps of the $50,000 transaction Preston had used to secure the Oak Bluffs estate. The transfer did not trigger a standard banking fraud alert because the funds were initiated from a trusted device, Elena detailed, tracking the digital sequence. "Preston holds a secondary advisory role on your parents' investment portfolio. He convinced your father years ago to let his firm handle their wealth management to maximize their returns. He used his administrative privileges to bypass the two-factor authentication and quietly liquidate a massive portion of Shirley highest yield mutual funds." The room fell into a heavy, calculated silence. Preston had not just stolen their money for a vacation rental. He had completely breached his fiduciary duty as a licensed financial advisor. He had weaponized his white privilege and his elite professional title to gain complete, unrestricted access to my parents' life savings. He knew they trusted him implicitly because he represented the exact kind of high society success they worshipped. And he used that blind, pathetic trust to bleed them entirely dry. "So where does this leave us?" I asked, looking directly at the federal investigators. "I have the wire transfer logs, the security footage of him admitting his insolvency at my gates, and the audio recordings from the customer service line where he confessed his firm was underwater." "Is it enough to execute an arrest warrant?" The lead investigator shook his head slowly. "It is enough to open a formal probe, but white-collar financial crimes require a massive burden of proof regarding criminal intent." He could easily claim the wire transfer was an authorized loan from his mother-in-law to save his business. Unless your mother officially files charges against him, which, based on her social media posts defending him today, seems highly unlikely, he might be able to tie this up in civil litigation for years. We need him to make a much larger, undeniable mistake in a highly public setting where he cannot control the narrative. I sat back in my chair, my mind calculating the variables at lightning speed. Preston was currently trapped in a cheap motel, his billionaire investors had abandoned him, and his firm was days away from total collapse. He needed capital and he needed it immediately. A man obsessed with appearances who has just been publicly humiliated will always try to orchestrate a massive theatrical comeback to prove his worth. I looked up at Elena and the legal team. He is going to try to replace the investment money he lost this weekend, I stated with absolute certainty. He cannot go to traditional banks because his credit is destroyed. He cannot go to his old investors because they just saw him locked out of the estate. He is going to target the only vulnerable demographic he has left. He is going to leverage my parents' pristine reputation in the Black elite community to lure in private angel investors. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard, searching through Preston's recent digital activity and corporate filings. "You are exactly right," she said, her voice laced with professional awe. "I am looking at a series of venue deposits and event permits filed under his corporate holding company just yesterday. He is organizing a massive high society charity gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Boston for the end of the month. The guest list is a who is who of wealthy minority business owners and local politicians." The federal investigators exchanged a sharp, knowing glance. "He is setting up a classic affinity fraud scheme," one investigator noted. "He is going to use your parents' trusted faces to lower the defenses of wealthy investors in their community and then pitch them a fraudulent real estate acquisition to steal their capital and cover his massive debts." A cold, brilliant strategy locked into place in my mind. I looked around the soundproof glass boardroom, feeling the absolute weight of the power I currently possessed. I was no longer the silent victim absorbing their endless abuse. I was the architect of their impending destruction. "We are not going to stop the gala," I instructed, my voice echoing with pure corporate authority. "We are going to let him host his beautiful, elegant party. We are going to let my parents put on their finest clothes and smile for the cameras. We are going to let him stand on a stage and pitch his massive, fraudulent real estate deal to the entire city. And then we are going to walk through the front doors and tear his entire life apart." I turned to my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless, brilliant man who had guided my company through its most aggressive acquisitions. "I need you to create a secure, highly vetted alias," I told him. "You are going to attend that gala as a representative of a massive anonymous offshore trust. You are going to look Preston right in his arrogant face and offer him $10 million to fund his fake real estate project. We are going to get his entire fraudulent pitch, his criminal intent, and his desperate lies permanently recorded on a federal wiretap." The investigators nodded in firm agreement, recognizing the sheer undeniable brilliance of the trap. It was the perfect setup. Vanessa could continue to type her hateful, desperate lies from the stained bed of a cheap roadside motel. My parents could continue to pray for my troubled soul in their elite social media groups. They could spend the next 3 weeks believing they had successfully banished me from their perfect upper-class world. I sat in my multi-million-dollar headquarters, surrounded by federal agents and financial experts, perfectly content to let them enjoy their temporary digital victory. Because while they were busy playing games on the internet, I was meticulously building a federal cage that would lock their golden boy away for a very long time. The trap was set, the bait was being prepared, and the countdown to their absolute spectacular ruin had officially begun. Preston returned to Boston with the lingering stench of that cheap roadside motel clinging to his expensive suits. The reality of his imminent financial execution was breathing heavily down his neck every single second of the day. He knew with terrifying absolute certainty that he had exactly 3 weeks before Shirley received her standard quarterly retirement portfolio statement in the mail. The very moment she opened that thick envelope and saw the missing $50,000, his entire meticulously crafted fake life would instantly evaporate into nothing. He could not simply ask for the stolen money back because he had spent the rest of the miserable weekend desperately trying to convince my parents that the booking error was a massive corporate conspiracy designed to ruin his flawless reputation. He had to replace the stolen retirement funds, and he needed to secure millions more to satisfy the aggressive institutional lenders who were currently threatening to seize his remaining assets. He went to my parents with a beautifully bound portfolio of absolute lies and empty promises. He sat in their pristine living room and poured them vintage wine, spinning a captivating tale of exclusive real estate dominance. He told them that the humiliating incident at Oak Bluffs had actually opened a highly lucrative backdoor opportunity for their family. He claimed that the luxury management company was quietly facing bankruptcy, and that he was assembling a private acquisition group to buy out the entire coastal portfolio for pennies on the dollar. He pitched it as the ultimate sweet revenge against the corporate entity that had publicly embarrassed them at the front gates. He told Desmond and Shirley that if they used their flawless high society reputation to co-host a massive investment gala, he would personally grant them a premium equity stake in the historic buyout. My parents devoured his lies with the desperate, frantic hunger of people terrified of losing their elite social status. Desmond immediately began making phone calls to his extensive network of wealthy Black doctors, lawyers, and legacy business owners. He leveraged decades of carefully curated community trust to convince his affluent peers that his brilliant white son-in-law was offering them the financial opportunity of a lifetime. Shirley took complete control of the event planning, booking the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in downtown Boston using her own personal credit. She was so absolutely obsessed with the idea of returning to Martha Vineyard as a conquering owner that she completely ignored every single glaring red flag. She never once questioned why a senior managing director needed his retired in-laws to fund the catering and venue deposits for a multi-million-dollar investment pitch. Vanessa spent her days ordering custom designer gowns on her few remaining credit cards, bragging to anyone who would listen about her husband, massive upcoming real estate monopoly. She posted endless vague updates on her social media accounts, hinting at a historic financial acquisition that would cement her family legacy forever. She was entirely complicit in maintaining the illusion of their massive wealth, even though she knew Preston was drowning in debt. She chose to actively ignore the reality of their collapsing bank accounts because the terrifying truth was simply too inconvenient for her fragile ego to process. Preston worked feverishly to build a digital house of cards that could withstand basic public scrutiny. He hired freelance graphic designers to create glossy investment brochures featuring stolen drone footage of my actual coastal properties. He fabricated complex financial projections showing astronomical returns on investment within the first 12 months of the fake acquisition. He named his fake shell company the Vineyard Heritage Acquisition Fund, specifically designed to prey on the cultural pride and generational wealth aspirations of the elite Black community in Boston. He was actively weaponizing their shared history and their desire for exclusive land ownership to steal their hard-earned capital. The sheer predatory nature of his scheme was repulsive, but it was also entirely predictable for a desperate man backed into a corner. I watched his entire fraudulent operation materialize from the quiet comfort of my secure corporate boardroom. Elena and the federal investigators monitored every single digital flyer and email invitation that Preston sent out to my parents' network. They built a comprehensive federal case file documenting his blatant misuse of interstate communication channels to solicit fraudulent investments. The level of detail he put into faking the financial prospectus was almost impressive, until you realized he was using my actual public property tax records to make his fake numbers look legitimate. He was quite literally using the blueprint of my own success to dig his own federal grave. My lead corporate attorney Harrison was selected to play the role of the ultimate bait in our carefully designed trap. Harrison was a brilliant, ruthless negotiator who looked exactly like the kind of wealthy international investor Preston was desperately trying to attract. The federal investigators spent 3 full days completely backstopping Harrison's new undercover identity. They created fake corporate websites, registered dummy offshore holding companies, and established an untraceable financial footprint that verified him as the primary manager of a multi-billion-dollar private equity fund. The FBI technicians fitted Harrison with a state-of-the-art covert recording device, ensuring that every single word Preston spoke would be captured in crisp, high-definition audio directly admissible in federal court. The night of the gala arrived with a heavy, humid heat settling over the streets of Boston. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was decorated in opulent gold and black, reflecting the absolute delusion and arrogance of my family. I sat in an unmarked federal surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, staring at a glowing bank of monitors alongside 2 senior agents. The audio feed clicked to life as Harrison walked through the grand double doors of the ballroom. I could hear the clinking of expensive champagne glasses and the low, sophisticated murmur of wealthy attendees. Harrison moved through the elegant crowd with practiced elite grace, bypassing the open bar and walking directly toward the VIP presentation area where Preston was holding court. My parents were standing near the front of the stage, beaming with unearned pride as they greeted the wealthiest members of their social circle. They were completely oblivious to the fact that they were actively helping a con artist steal millions of dollars from their closest friends. Vanessa was draped in a sparkling emerald gown, laughing loudly and sipping a specialty cocktail while pretending her life was an absolute fairy tale. Preston's voice came through the audio feed, dripping with that same unearned, arrogant confidence he had used to mock my disabled daughter at the dinner table. He was in the middle of pitching his fake buyout to a group of prominent local surgeons, promising them exclusive access to the most coveted real estate on the eastern seaboard. Harrison smoothly inserted himself into the conversation, casually dropping a few highly specific financial terms that immediately caught Preston's attention. I watched through the hidden camera embedded in Harrison's lapel as Preston's eyes practically dilated with pure, unadulterated greed. He recognized instantly that Harrison represented a level of institutional wealth that dwarfed everyone else in the ballroom combined. Preston abandoned the local doctors without a second thought and eagerly ushered Harrison away from the crowded floor and into a private reserved suite just off the main ballroom. This was the exact moment the steel jaws of the trap snapped completely shut. The private suite was quiet, eliminating any background noise that could potentially compromise the federal wiretap. Harrison played his role to absolute flawless perfection. He acted slightly bored and deeply impatient, forcing Preston to pitch harder and talk faster to secure the deal. Preston unrolled his glossy, stolen blueprints and began making explicit, detailed guarantees about the Oak Bluffs properties. He explicitly claimed he already held the primary deeds in a secure escrow account and that he simply needed immediate bridge capital to finalize the massive acquisition before the end of the fiscal quarter. Harrison leaned back in his chair and delivered the fatal calculated blow. He told Preston that he did not have time for small, incremental community investments. He stated calmly that if Preston could guarantee a complete total takeover of the luxury estates by the end of the month, his offshore fund would wire exactly $10 million into Preston corporate accounts by tomorrow morning. I held my breath in the dim light of the surveillance van, listening to the absolute heavy silence on the live audio feed. Preston was staring at $10 million of fake federal money, and I knew his massive ego could never refuse a lifeline that large. Preston sealed his own permanent fate without a single second of hesitation. He eagerly accepted the $10 million offer, explicitly repeating his fraudulent real estate guarantees directly into the hidden federal microphone. He promised Harrison full legal ownership of properties he did not own and assured him the returns were completely guaranteed by his firm. The criminal intent was now completely locked in and heavily documented on federal servers. His spectacular public downfall was now absolutely unstoppable, and I was finally ready to step out of the shadows and walk through those ballroom doors to tear his fake empire to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a masterpiece of manufactured elegance, designed specifically to project an illusion of untouchable generational wealth. Heavy crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over the crowd of Boston elite Black society. The room was filled with the kind of people my parents had spent their entire lives trying to impress: prominent surgeons, legacy business owners, and influential politicians. They were all gathered here completely unaware that they were serving as extras in Preston's desperate, pathetic production. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric with false triumph. Vanessa was holding court near the front of the stage, draped in a custom emerald gown that was undoubtedly purchased on a maxed-out credit card. She wore a heavy diamond necklace that caught the light as she laughed loudly, tossing her hair and soaking in the envious glances of her peers. She was playing the role of the ultimate high society wife, completely intoxicated by the illusion of her husband's massive success. Desmond and Shirley were in their element, circulating through the crowd with practiced, easy grace. Shirley was wearing a designer silk dress, holding a flute of vintage champagne, and accepting congratulations from her friends as if she had personally negotiated the multi-million-dollar acquisition herself. Desmond was clapping his golfing buddies on the shoulder, speaking in low, authoritative tones about the importance of legacy wealth and community investment. They were absolutely vibrating with unearned pride, entirely blind to the fact that the man they were championing had just stolen their entire retirement portfolio. The string quartet in the corner of the room transitioned into a dramatic, swelling piece of music, signaling the main event of the evening. The chatter in the ballroom died down as Preston confidently strode onto the elevated stage. He adjusted the microphone, his face flushed with the adrenaline of what he thought was a successful $10 million con. He looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, his arrogant smile firmly in place, completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs resting directly on his chest. "Good evening, distinguished guests, friends and family." Preston began, his voice booming through the high-end sound system. "Tonight we are not just celebrating a financial milestone. We are celebrating a historic moment of cultural and economic reclamation. As many of you know, my firm, the Vineyard Heritage Acquisition Fund, has been working tirelessly to secure a portfolio of the most exclusive legacy properties in Oak Bluffs." He paused, letting the weight of his lie settle over the room. Vanessa beamed up at him, her eyes shining with fake adoration. Desmond nodded sagely, projecting the image of a proud patriarch. "Tonight, I am incredibly honored to announce that we have successfully finalized the terms of this massive acquisition." Preston continued, his voice rising with theatrical passion. "We have secured the absolute crown jewel of Martha Vineyard, and we are officially opening the fund to select visionary investors in this room who want to be part of this unprecedented generational wealth transfer." This was my cue. I stepped out of the surveillance van, the humid Boston night air hitting my face as I walked toward the grand entrance of the Plaza Hotel. I was not wearing my usual modest attire. I was dressed in a bespoke, immaculately tailored white power suit that radiated absolute, undeniable authority. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe style, and my expression was a mask of pure, cold corporate calculation. Flanking me on either side were my elite legal counsel and 3 plainclothes federal investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. We bypassed the busy reception desk and walked with heavy synchronized purpose toward the main ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors stood tall and imposing, guarded by 2 private security contractors Preston had hired for the event. As we approached, the guards moved to intercept us, raising their hands to demand invitations. The lead federal investigator did not even break stride. He simply flashed his gold badge, opening his jacket just enough to display the firearm holstered at his hip. The security guards instantly recognized the absolute weight of federal authority. They stepped back immediately, pulling the heavy brass handles and swinging the massive double doors wide open. The timing was cinematic perfection. Preston was in the middle of describing the infinity pool and the private beach access of my estate, his voice ringing out across the silent, attentive crowd. The heavy thud of the ballroom doors hitting the walls echoed through the space, cutting through his fraudulent pitch like a gunshot. Every single head in the room turned toward the entrance. The collective intake of breath from the elite crowd was audible as I stepped into the warm golden light of the chandeliers. I walked slowly, deliberately down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The visual contrast was stark, the sea of dark formal wear parting to make way for the woman in the pristine white suit. Preston's voice died in his throat. He froze mid-sentence, his hand gripping the microphone stand so tightly his knuckles turned white. The color completely drained from his face as his eyes locked onto mine. The arrogant, successful finance executive vanished instantly, replaced by a terrified, desperate man staring at the architect of his total destruction. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp. She stepped forward from the front row, her emerald gown shimmering as she raised a trembling hand to point at me. "Tara! What are you doing here?" She screeched, her carefully modulated high society voice shattering into a hysterical shriek. "Security! Get her out of here!" "She is not invited. She is trespassing." She turned frantically toward the security guards standing near the entrance, waving her arms and demanding they physically remove me from the building. But the guards did not move. They stood perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the federal investigators flanking me. Desmond and Shirley stood frozen near the front of the room, their champagne flutes trembling in their hands. Shirley's face was a mask of absolute horror, her eyes darting between my white suit and the plainclothes agents walking beside me. Desmond's jaw clenched, his chest heaving as he tried to comprehend how the daughter he had dismissed as a failure had just commanded federal agents to step aside. I did not stop walking until I reached the base of the stage. I looked up at Preston, who was currently sweating through his expensive tailored suit, his eyes darting frantically toward the emergency exits. I offered him a slow, perfectly composed smile. "You forgot to mention one minor detail about your historic acquisition, Preston," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent, stunned ballroom without the need for a microphone. "You forgot to mention that the properties are not actually for sale. And you certainly forgot to mention that the owner of the Oak Bluffs estate is currently standing right in front of you." The silence in the grand ballroom was so absolute that I could hear the rapid, ragged breathing of the man standing on the stage above me. Preston was completely frozen, his hand still clutching the microphone stand, as if it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing onto the polished wood floor. I walked up the short flight of stairs leading to the elevated platform, my white suit stark against the dark velvet curtains framing the presentation screen. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the heavy, suffocating weight of my presence crush his remaining air supply. When I reached the center of the stage, I calmly reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling fingers. He did not resist. His muscles were locked in pure, unadulterated terror. I turned to face the sea of wealthy investors, prominent surgeons, and legacy business owners who were staring at me in absolute shock. I gave a subtle nod to my lead corporate attorney, Harrison, who was standing near the audio-visual control booth. Harrison smoothly handed a secure encrypted flash drive to the hotel technician, instructing him to override Preston's carefully curated fraudulent investment presentation immediately. The massive projection screen behind us flickered black for a fraction of a second before roaring back to life. The bright, high-definition display illuminated the entire ballroom, casting a harsh, unforgiving light over Preston's pale, sweating face. The very first image to appear on the screen was a crisp, perfectly scanned copy of the official property deed for the Oak Bluffs estate. The document bore the official seal of the state registry and the unmistakable, unalterable legal signatures that proved absolute ownership. I let the image sit there for a long moment, allowing the crowd to read it clearly. As you can see clearly on the screen behind me, the historic coastal properties that this man just promised to sell you belong entirely to me, I stated, my voice resonating through the pristine speakers with cool corporate authority. "I purchased the Oak Bluffs estate 2 years ago under a blind corporate trust, and I hold the sole exclusive title to the land and the structure. There is no acquisition fund, there is no historic buyout. The investment opportunity you were just pitched is nothing more than a desperate, pathetic criminal fabrication designed to steal your hard-earned capital forever." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom as the wealthy elite realized they had just been targeted by a massive predatory scam. The prominent doctors and politicians who had been eager to hand over their money mere moments ago now glared at Preston with profound, chilling disgust. Preston stumbled backward, knocking heavily into the podium. He tried to speak, to formulate some kind of defense, but his mouth only opened and closed in silent, helpless panic. I did not give him a chance to recover. I signaled to Harrison again, and the giant screen shifted to the next devastating slide. The new image displayed a comprehensive, deeply detailed financial forensic report. It outlined the complete structural collapse of Preston's supposedly elite financial firm. The screen showed rows upon rows of glaring red numbers, highlighting severely overdrawn corporate accounts, massive outstanding institutional loans, and countless final notice warnings from aggressive creditors. These were the private internal banking records of a man who was drowning in millions of dollars of highly leveraged debt. The crowd murmured in dark realization as they processed the sheer magnitude of his insolvency. He was not a successful managing director, bringing them an exclusive generational wealth opportunity. He is a thoroughly bankrupt con artist, using the pristine social reputation of my own parents to lure you into a multi-million-dollar trap. I continued gesturing gracefully toward the damning financial data currently on the screen. His personal credit lines have been entirely exhausted for over 6 months. His primary investment fund is totally insolvent. The lavish lifestyle he has been flaunting in your country clubs and charity galas is entirely funded by a sophisticated shell game of moving borrowed money from one fraudulent corporate entity to another. He has absolutely zero capital and zero actual legal authority. Down in the front row, the carefully constructed reality of my family was violently shattering. My mother, Shirley, was gripping the edge of a cocktail table so tightly her knuckles were stark white. Her designer silk dress suddenly looked entirely out of place on a woman who was rapidly realizing her elite social standing was a complete illusion built by a criminal. My father, Desmond, stood rigidly beside her, his chest heaving as the horrific truth washed over him. The wealthy peers he had personally invited, the friends he had vouched for, were currently staring at him with deep suspicion. Vanessa stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her custom emerald gown shimmering uselessly in the harsh light of the projector. She was staring at the red numbers on the screen, her eyes wide and frantic. She had spent years mocking my career and my modest lifestyle, hiding behind the protective shield of her husband's supposed generational wealth. Now that shield was being publicly dismantled piece by miserable piece, exposing her to the harsh, unforgiving judgment of the exact high society circle she had sacrificed everything to impress. The humiliation was absolute, and it was only half finished. But the most repulsive part of this entire criminal operation is not the fact that he attempted to defraud all of you tonight, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous timbre that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. The truly despicable part is how he managed to secure the initial capital to maintain his fake wealthy facade over the past few long weeks. I looked directly down at my parents, who were staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I gave Harrison the final signal to display the ultimate piece of evidence. The screen behind me shifted one last time, projecting a highly sensitive banking document that made the entire ballroom fall dead silent. It was a certified digital receipt for a wire transfer in the exact amount of $50,000. The origin account belonged to a highly secure private retirement portfolio, and the destination account belonged to the fake shell company Preston had used to attempt the Oak Bluffs booking. The routing numbers, the timestamps, and the explicit authorization codes were all displayed in massive, undeniable text for the entire elite Black community of Boston to see and comprehend clearly. I looked straight at my mother, Shirley, whose face had drained of all color, leaving her looking small and incredibly frail. The $50,000 used to fund the deposits for this fraudulent gala and to maintain the illusion of his high society access was stolen directly from the retirement savings of Desmond and Shirley Washington. I announced the words hanging heavy and brutal in the quiet room. He used his secondary advisory access to silently bypass the security protocols and drain their entire life savings, all to fund a luxury vacation rental that I had already permanently blocked online. Shirley let out a piercing, agonizing scream that shattered the silence of the ballroom. It was a raw, visceral sound of pure, unending devastation. Her knees buckled completely, giving way beneath the weight of the realization that her golden white son-in-law had ruthlessly robbed her blind. Desmond lunged forward, catching her before she hit the marble floor, but his own face was contorted in absolute physical agony. He clutched wildly at his chest, his fingers digging desperately into the fine fabric of his expensive tuxedo jacket as he struggled to draw air into his suddenly constricted, terrified lungs. The proud, arrogant patriarch who had spent his entire life dictating respectability politics and demanding absolute obedience was now gasping for breath in front of his wealthy peers, broken by the very man he had elevated above his own flesh and blood. Desmond staggered heavily against the cocktail table, his eyes locked onto the massive banking receipt projected on the large screen. The numbers represented decades of his hard work, his social climbing and his secure future, all completely wiped out by a fast-talking con artist who had exploited his desperate, pathetic need for white corporate validation and elite status. The crowd erupted into chaos. Prominent surgeons and legacy business owners backed away from my parents as if their sudden tragic poverty was a contagious disease. The social isolation was immediate and incredibly cruel, exactly the kind of behavior my parents had practiced for decades. Vanessa let out a hysterical wail, dropping her champagne flute to the floor, where it shattered into countless glittering pieces. She rushed toward the stage, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the polished marble, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic as she tried to defend the crumbling ruins of her fake, luxurious life. "This is a lie!" she screamed, her voice cracking and breaking under the intense scrutiny of hundreds of judgmental eyes. "Tara is lying to all of you. She hacked the bank accounts to make us look bad because she is a bitter, jealous, divorced failure." She pointed a trembling manicured finger at me, desperate to spin the narrative back in her favor. "Preston is a senior managing director. He has millions of dollars in offshore trusts. He would never touch their retirement money. You have to believe me. She is completely insane and she is trying to ruin us entirely." I looked down at my older sister, feeling absolutely no pity for the pathetic, desperate creature she had become. I simply reached into the pocket of my white blazer and pulled out a small black audio recording device. I held it up to the microphone, ensuring the clear, crisp playback would resonate through the entire grand ballroom. The recording featured a phone call from earlier that week, a conversation between Vanessa and Preston that my corporate security team had legally intercepted when Preston foolishly used my company network to try and force the fake Oak Bluffs reservation through the system. The audio played, filling the silent, stunned space with Vanessa's own unmistakable, haughty voice. "I do not care that you had to take it from my mother retirement fund," the recorded. Vanessa hissed, her tone dripping with selfish, toxic entitlement. "Just put the money back before the next quarterly statement arrives. If we do not show up to Martha Vineyard in a luxury vehicle with a private chef, the entire community will know we are broke. I will not let that disabled brat and my loser sister ruin my summer. Just secure the rental and fix the massive debt later." The recording clicked off, and the silence that followed was heavy, toxic, and completely absolute. The entire high society crowd stared at Vanessa with profound, unmasked disgust. She had known. She had known that her husband was actively stealing the last remaining life savings from her own elderly parents, and she had explicitly encouraged the theft just to maintain her fake social standing and afford a luxury vacation. She had prioritized her shallow, elite image over the financial survival of the very people who had coddled and spoiled her for her entire life. Her betrayal was absolute and deeply sickening. Shirley stopped crying and stared up at her golden child, her eyes wide with a horrified, shattered understanding. The daughter she had placed on an impossible pedestal, the daughter she had protected and praised while emotionally destroying me, had willingly sacrificed her to a corporate thief just to keep wearing designer gowns. Vanessa stood completely frozen, the weight of hundreds of judgmental glares pressing down on her shoulders. Her elite facade was entirely eradicated. She was exposed, stripped bare, and publicly condemned as a shallow, complicit fraud in front of the only high society crowd whose approval she desperately craved. The crushing weight of the revelation left the entire ballroom entirely paralyzed. Preston stood on the stage, his chest heaving as the reality of his situation finally breached his thick, arrogant skull. The three plainclothes federal investigators who had flanked my entrance did not wait for another invitation. They moved with swift, terrifying precision, stepping onto the elevated platform and flanking Preston from both sides. The lead investigator firmly grasped Preston by the shoulder, turning him around and slamming his hands behind his back. The sharp, heavy metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed loudly through the silent room, cutting through the stifling tension. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny," the investigator announced, his voice calm and entirely devoid of sympathy. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." Preston began to openly weep right there on the stage, his knees buckling as the agents held him up. He sobbed loudly, begging the wealthy investors in the front row for help, pleading with the local politicians he had just been trying to impress to intervene on his behalf. They all turned their faces away in absolute disgust, some even pulling out their smartphones to record the spectacular downfall of the man who had just tried to steal their millions. Vanessa, watching her entire fraudulent kingdom collapse in a matter of seconds, finally snapped. She rushed forward, falling heavily to her knees at the base of the stage, ruining her expensive emerald gown on the hard marble floor. She looked up at me, her face smeared with expensive makeup and genuine, desperate tears. "Tara, please," she wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her absolute humiliation. "You have to stop this. You have the money to make this go away. You can fix this. Please do not let them take him. We will lose everything. The house, the cars, my reputation. You are my sister. You have to save us." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping woman who had spent my entire life trying to destroy my self-worth. I thought about the cruel comments she made about my beautiful hearing-impaired daughter. I thought about how she had eagerly encouraged the theft of our parents' life savings, just to rent a beach house for a weekend, to impress people who did not even care about her. I raised the microphone to my lips one final time. I looked directly into her terrified, frantic eyes. "Your husband has no place in high society," I stated, my voice perfectly cold and entirely detached. "But he has a permanent place in a federal cell." I dropped the microphone, allowing it to hit the polished floor with a heavy, definitive thud. I turned my back on my sister and walked smoothly out of the ballroom, my legal team right beside me, leaving the federal agents to drag the weeping, arrogant finance executive out through the service elevator. The elite Black community of Boston watched in complete silence as the golden couple of their social circle was utterly, permanently destroyed. 3 weeks passed since the spectacular collapse at the Plaza Hotel. The fallout was absolute and merciless. Preston was denied bail, sitting in a federal holding facility, while his mounting list of creditors tore his remaining assets to shreds. Vanessa was forced to instantly vacate her luxury penthouse, moving into a cramped studio apartment while facing severe legal scrutiny for her complicity in the wire fraud. My corporate empire continued to thrive, operating with a level of peace and efficiency I had never known before. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when my executive assistant buzzed my secure office line. She informed me with a slightly apologetic tone that Desmond and Shirley Washington were standing in the lobby demanding to see me. They had bypassed the building security by waiting for a delivery driver to open the main doors. I did not panic. I simply instructed my assistant to let them up to the executive floor and asked my corporate security detail to stand by just in case. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open and my parents walked in. They looked completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, proud patriarch and the image-obsessed matriarch were entirely gone. Desmond was wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked slightly wrinkled, and Shirley was clutching a cheap, unbranded handbag, her face tired and deeply lined with intense, severe stress. They stood in front of my massive mahogany desk, looking small and incredibly fragile. "Tara," my mother started, her voice trembling with desperate, raw emotion. "Thank you for seeing us. We did not know where else to go." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers, and waited for them to speak. Desmond swallowed hard, unable to maintain eye contact with me. "The banks are foreclosing on the estate," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Preston completely drained the retirement accounts, and the legal fees trying to untangle Shirley's name from his fraudulent shell companies are bankrupting us. We have absolutely nothing left. Our friends have completely abandoned us. The country club revoked our membership. We are going to be homeless by the end of the month." Shirley began to cry, soft, pathetic sobs that echoed in the quiet office. "Please, Tara," she begged, stepping closer to the desk. We know we made terrible mistakes. We know we treated you poorly, but we are still your parents. You have so much wealth. You have this massive company. You could write a single check and save us from total ruin. Please do not let us lose our home. Lose. I looked at the two people who had spent 32 years actively trying to make me feel small. I thought about the night they sat at their formal dining table and agreed that my disabled daughter did not deserve to exist in polite society. I thought about how they had eagerly praised the man who was actively robbing them simply because he offered them a fake proximity to whiteness and wealth. You do not want an apology. I stated, my voice perfectly calm and level. You want a bailout. You ignored my worth and degraded my child for years, and the only reason you are standing in my office today is because the golden child you worshipped finally burned your entire lives to the ground. Desmond flinched as if I had physically struck him. We are family, he pleaded desperately, attempting to use his old patriarch voice one last time. Family forgives. No, I corrected him smoothly. Healthy people forgive. Healthy people set firm, permanent boundaries to protect their peace. You did not care about family when you allowed Vanessa to mock Brielle. You did not care about family when you told me I was a massive disappointment for leaving law school to start my own business. You made your choices and you made them very clearly. I stood up from my desk, buttoning my tailored blazer. You chose your golden child, I said, delivering the final, absolute verdict. Now live with the consequences. I pressed the security button on my desk. Two large security guards immediately entered the office, stepping firmly between my desk and my parents. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Washington out of the building, I instructed calmly. They are no longer permitted on the premises. Shirley let out a devastating wail, reaching her hand out toward me, but the guards expertly guided them both toward the glass doors. Desmond's head hung low, completely broken, as he led his sobbing wife out of my corporate headquarters. I watched the doors close behind them, feeling a massive, suffocating weight finally lift off my shoulders forever. The rest of the summer unfolded exactly as I had originally planned, but infinitely better. I returned to the Oak Bluffs estate in Martha Vineyard, leaving the city and the toxic drama far behind. The weather was absolutely flawless, with bright blue skies and a gentle, warm ocean breeze sweeping across the private bluffs. The heavy wrought iron gates remained permanently locked to anyone who did not bring genuine joy and respect into our lives. I sat on the soft, warm sand of my private beach, wearing a simple, comfortable swimsuit, feeling the sun kiss my skin. A few yards away, Brielle was happily building a massive, elaborate sandcastle near the gently rolling waves. Her bright yellow, floaty suit matched the brilliant summer sun, and her joyful laughter rang out clear and completely unobstructed. She did not have to worry about speaking perfectly or hiding her hearing aid. She was completely free to be her beautiful, brilliant self. Surrounding us on the beach were my actual chosen family. My lead attorney Harrison was attempting to help Brielle dig a moat for her castle, while my loyal executive assistant and a few close corporate partners lounged on beach chairs, sipping iced drinks and sharing genuine, warm conversation. There were no forced smiles, no elitist judgment, and absolutely no toxic comparisons. We were just people enjoying the massive, beautiful success we had built together through hard work and mutual respect. I looked out over the deep, rich blue waters of the Atlantic Ocean, listening to the happy sounds of my daughter and my true friends. The fake empire of my toxic family had been completely dismantled, leaving behind nothing but dust and consequences. But the empire I had built, the one rooted in fierce independence, absolute truth, and unconditional love for my child, stood taller and stronger than ever before. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salty ocean air, finally entirely at peace. The most profound lesson from this story is that blood does not define true family, and sharing a last name does not obligate you to endure endless abuse. For years, Tara accepted disrespect to keep peace, hoping her parents would eventually recognize her worth. However, she finally realized that toxic people, will only consume your energy to maintain their own fragile illusions of superiority. Real empowerment comes from establishing unbreakable boundaries and protecting your inner peace at all costs. You do not owe your success or your forgiveness to those who deliberately tried to destroy you when you were vulnerable. If you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives to protect your peace, please share your experience in the comments below, and do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories.